When is a character a must pull? Because that word is thrown around so often, from characters like Nahida as a relatively recent release, to units such as Furina or even Kazuha. I want to kind of gauge not only when the community believes a character is a must pull, but subsequently also when a character legitimately may be considered a must pull. I have a lot of characters here, and I've invested quite heavily into pretty much anybody either A with a star next to them or B in the 80 to 90 category, specifically the 90 characters. I have constellations on a few, skins on others that I really enjoy, and most of my 5-star characters have their respective signature weapons. I've also played numerous different teams. And so first we're going to go over the characters who the community views as a relatively high in terms of pull priority, almost a must pull. Kazuha, he's primarily used as a buffer in pretty much any category, and previously I would say that that would be a pretty high thing to have. We have a lot of buffers now and a lot of 4-star supports that are pretty good, but he still reigns supreme in most categories. However, there is a situation now. With the release of Dendro units and units that prioritize Dendro reaction, such as Bloom, Super Bloom in Nilo's case, physical damage, Dendro damage, Anemo DPS, and any Geo character, that's essentially 3, and to a degree 4, of the elements that really don't synergize well with Kazuha. Now, if we're looking at the rest of the roster, yes, he can be good, and he is good in some degree at proccing elemental reactions. But for instance, if you were to use him in a Ganyu melt composition and you wanted him to assist in swirling Pyro to allow your Ganyu to melt more frequently, well, now you have Nahida who transfers Elemental Mastery, so Nahida has a higher pull priority for that team. If utilizing a Pyro character, then yes, he can give them Elemental damage bonus. But his pull priority goes down with the introduction of a character like Furina, who just gives you a solid damage bonus, and it can allow Pyro characters to vape. There also is the ease of use category. Since Kazuha's Swirl essentially has its own set of priorities, with the Hydro, Pyro, Cryo, and then Electro kind of being the last priority, it does mean that in some situations, depending on your team composition, he may not swirl the right elements. That means that your VV isn't exactly useful. VV is good. However, if you don't really care about the full 40% resistance shred, it only provides you with interruption resistance and a 20% universal red shred. Let's ignore him for a second. When Kazuha was the only buffer of his kind, I think he was a wonderful character, but as we've gotten more buffers like him, more units who can better support their own individual elements, not just a Bennett for Pyro and universal attack elements, but units who can buff specific types of damage, or a more spread out roster of elemental damage buffers, I think his pull priority has gone down. He also is an individual who, in my personal opinion, whilst being able to buff characters really well, does depend on who you're buffing. Because there's such a wide variety of characters, it's honestly a bit difficult to say, yeah, he buffed this character to such a massive degree that you perform really well. Let's look at just the 5-stars because I think those are the premier DPS characters. Ignoring the ones he doesn't care to buff at all and cannot buff, he has a few standout teams. Lenny, with him and somebody like Bennett as well as Zhongli, performs wonderfully. Or you can just do Lenny with Xiangling and Bennett because you want to maximize the effect of his Pyro bonuses. Sino performs great, but is a Dendro-oriented character, so let's ignore him. The Hydro-oriented teams are extremely good, but Furina, once again, does work a bit better in those teams and has more utility because she can also be a healer if you really need her to be and provide you with a universal damage buff. Because Kazuha is an Anemo character, he can swirl other elements, so you don't really have that guarantee of him swirling Hydro. Don't get me wrong, it's a higher chance, but maybe not the best. Raiden's Hyper Carry team is extremely good, don't get me wrong. Raiden, Kujosara, Bennett, and then Kazuha can perform great, but you need to also consider that if you were to hypothetically, once again, slide in Furina, you might get more damage or at least more utility without having to worry about what VV shreds. Some characters, yeah, they can vape, and yeah, he can swirl their element, but legitimately speaking, him swirling may instead ruin their elemental reactions respectively, and so as a result, he may not be as good of a pairing as I think a lot of people want him to be. He is a strong character when he's allowed to buff you right. But if your character either A, doesn't deal a high amount of nuke damage within that small window, or B, has alternative options, it may be better to go for those. A Kazuha buffing a Sino could be good for just that Electro or even Aggravate team. But if you can get more damage out of a Quick Bloom team, then his buffs don't matter. And I think that's really the core issue. A character can be really good, but can fall off later on, and I think Kazuha was really good, but over time as we got more Dendro-related reactions or better teammates and better buffers of different types, then he kind of at least dropped in pull priority, especially considering he doesn't have the grouping of characters like Venti. Next up, Nahida. I'm gonna be blunt. Nahida is not a must pull in my opinion. She's a great character. I have her at C2 and she's triple crowned. She's a great character. I like her. She's cute. And she has some good art. But objectively speaking, Nahida isn't necessarily a must pull just because she has a good kit. She's more viewed as a must pull because so many Dendro related characters, Nilu, Sino, Alhaitham, and so on legitimately want her in his teams, in their respective teams, because she's not necessarily just a good unit, but also the best, essentially, Dendro applicator off field. And that entirely changes things. See, with characters like Kazuha or any other buffer, you have alternative options to do the same role. If you want VV Shred, go for any Anemo character. Go for Jean with a healer if you really want that. You can go for Ventia if you need solid grouping. You can go for Sayu, for Sucrose. It doesn't matter. You have different options with Kazuha. With Nahida, not so much. The off-field Dendro application of Kali isn't exactly good in most situations because it doesn't either have the range or her boomerang can miss, and that does kind of suck a little. And especially if you throw out her burst, you're stuck in circle impact, which is something a lot of people dislike. And so especially for the time she released, we didn't really have many off-field Dendro applicators, and we still don't to this day. So if you wanted to play Nilo Bloom, your best option was to get her and then get Nahida, strictly because Nahida could be your on-field driver for those Bloom reactions. Cyno, same thing. Because he requires such long on-field time, you don't have the ability to swap out to other units to actively, utilize his buffs or utilize Dendro application. So you need a character who can apply Dendro off-field and for long durations. That's Nahida's goal. Alhaitham, kind of the same thing. And so what you are left with is a character who's good, but is viewed better because of how little alternatives there are to her. I wouldn't say she's a must-pull, but she's definitely higher, as of right now, than a character like Kazuha. Next up, Furina. She's viewed as a must-pull strictly because she gives you that damage bonus. Now, the restrictions for it are obviously you want to essentially have HP being drained from you and given to you pretty consistently, and that is good. But realistically, in most scenarios, she becomes a must-pull or essentially one of the best characters or the best character for most teams with that C2. Without that C2, it's a bit harder to actually activate the full priority of this buff, and that C2 essentially extends its limitations. C1 extends it, C2 provides you with more damage, more HP, and so on. And what this essentially means is that Furina is a great character at C0. At C2, she becomes the best in slot for a vast majority, if not every team. And that changes things, because at C2, Nahida becomes wonderful. At C2, Kazuha gives a bunch of elements master to everybody. So if we're going to continue adding constellations, then every unit changes priority. Raiden becomes a great DPS at C2. At C0, maybe not so much. Cyno performs better in aggravate teams at C2. And you kind of get where I'm going with that. At C0, Furina is a good character, but you require either a healer to maximize those buffs, or you require somebody to instantly burst heal. You require in some way, shape, or form somebody who can reliably assist you in reaching a higher stack of fanfare. And in most contexts, it's going to be either a Baiju, a Xianyun now, or another Fontaine character like Novelette. And yeah, we do have older characters who can assist with that, like Jean, but even characters that are usually staples, like Bennett, don't have that same benefit. And so if we're looking at the top 3 characters people recommend as must-pulls, I'd say Nahida is the best, followed by Furina, followed by Kazuha. Or Furina if you're able to utilize either characters that are from Fontaine, or characters who can apply so much healing that you're able to maximize our fanfare stacks. And then Nahida. So when is a character a must-pull for you? Realistically, when they offer something that you need desperately, not just in one team, not just in one Nilo team, I mean in a vast majority of teams. Either they accelerate the damage of your favorite characters that you use often, like Xianyun would for Xiao, or they're a character who you know you're going to get a lot of value out of. There is no set strict must pull. If you don't use Dendro, Nahida isn't really good for you because you never use her. If you hate her character, she's not a must pull. If you don't like Furina's character, she's not a must pull. If you don't plan on using her or don't see yourself using her in a vast majority of teams, she's not a must pull. If you don't have a character who can be buffed sufficiently by Kazuha, either they're not a hyper carry or they are of an element that realistically he can't buff at all, then it doesn't matter what he can do because he's not doing anything for you. There is no must pull in this game. There are good pulls, but even those good pulls need specific prerequisites to be met before they can actually do their job. A Kazuha buffing a character like Hu Tao doesn't matter if Hu Tao can get more value out of a simple character like Yelan and a Xingqiu for that double Hydro maximization. And so if there are easier alternatives who you would either find more fun, more valuable, or provide you with new playstyles or something else you enjoy, then that character isn't a must pull. You can get by without them. I pulled Kazuha, I pulled his weapon as you can see here, I never use him. First off because I don't like the character, and second off because he doesn't provide me with anything that I would legitimately want. I use Nahida for one team with Cyno, that is it. I have Nilou, I don't even play her that much anymore. So Nahida, even though she's a good character, isn't someone I actively use. I have never used Furina since I've gotten her. I got her, I played her for a week, I played her for about 2 weeks actually, and I've never seen a real benefit to having her in my team compositions. Until we were faced off with all those, Pyro Elixirs, and I legitimately needed more Hydra application, that's it. That's the only situation in which she's been useful to me. So please, don't consider a character a must pull, consider what they can offer you and your account currently. Don't bet on the future. Don't pull someone like Xian Yun saying, oh my god, that's going to be so many plunge characters in the future. No, pull for Xian Yun if you use plunge characters now. Pull for Xian Yun if you like Ga Ming. Pull for Xian Yun if you like Xiao. Don't pull the expectation of a future character coming out because you can legitimately hate the design of that future character. Pull based on the present state of your account. Don't pull based on the future state you could have. And please, don't consider any character a must pull. Just look at them as a good unit to have if you use their teams. Pull for who you like first, whether you simp for them, whether you just like the art of them, or whether you legitimately think they may offer a fun playstyle. Don't pull based on how valuable they are, because the concept of value is so subjective, it's honestly impossible to give a solid ranking for anyone. Either way, this has been a slightly different video, but if you've enjoyed, hey, good. I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.